Welcome to Journeys Through Language and Literature. I'm Céline Sabiron, an assistant professor in English literature, specializing in cultural transfers and translation, working at Université de Lorraine in Nancy in France. Alongside MA students, Léa Richon and Vincent Thierry, we have identified 17 French translations of Charlotte Bronté's novel for the Prismatic Jane Eyre project. Here in this essay, I focus on 7 of them because they were the most comprehensive and influential, they were not abridged versions or adaptations, and the most meaningful for my inquiry concerning the translation of the French in the French translations of this canonical 1847 novel. In a posthumously published novel, The Professor, so published in 1857, Charlotte Bronté's narrator voices a poignant regret. I quote, "I wish I might write all she said to me in French. It loses sadly by being translated into English." Unquote. Nevertheless, she does sometimes boldly grant herself the freedom to write in French, as in her most best-selling Jane Eyre. Impulsive young ado babbles in French to discuss the cadeau that Mr. Rochester has bought her, and that consists of a robe. I quote, "Il faut que je l'essaie," cried she, "et à l'instant même." Unquote. Even though other foreign languages like German appear in Charlotte Bronté's heteroglossic work, French dominates so much that it constantly invades and interferes with the English script, revolving around the teaching of French. In Jane Eyre, she weaves a French linguistic thread throughout her text by recreating a French domestic bubble at Thornfield Hall. However, Charlotte Brontë doesn't overuse this linguistic license and often reverts to English. I quote, "I should translate it into English," unquote, she explains through the voice of a narrator in 1849 Shirley. Translation is therefore presented as both a loss and an injunction imposed by the dictates of the publishing industry in a British context. This goes against a spontaneous inner wish to write in a multilingual text, in which a language of expression would vary within the very same text, depending on the object of the writing. Following the concept and theories developed by translators and by translation and reception specialists, this essay proposes to combine literary, linguistic, and translatological approaches and study the French translators' responses to Bronté's interplay between familiarity and otherness, proximity and distance, feelings of closeness and estrangement, when she both, I quote, imposes and forbids translation. This is a quotation taken up from Derrida in Des Tours de Babel in Psyche. Translation is altogether necessary and impossible in Jane Eyre. So in order to do that, this essay builds on 3 key scholarly works. Véronique Béguin's essay on translating Villette, Emily Hill's insights on French in Jane Eyre, and Hélène Collins's discussion of multilingualism in The Professor. This research examines how translators have handled Bronté's original text to convey its meaning to French readers using side-by-side comparison of the English originals and their French versions. So in Jane Eyre, a French signifier is often preferred to its English equivalent owing to its aesthetic value. It's what Hélène Collin calls effet de réel étranger, picking up an expression by Roland Barthes. In the French translations, then, exoticism is visually conveyed through written marks, italics, stars, and notes, whereas in the original English, it is phonetically conveyed through the bare use of French words, that is to say, through French rhythm and sound. The translation work affects the reader's sensory experience as it shifts from the ear to the eye, from a sonorous to an ocular effect. Also, in the French translation, otherness is the fruit of decisions that involve both translators and editors. It is moved out of the author's text to feature as part of what Genet calls paratext, since it is imprinted in a text, materially inscribed as part of the printed page. In English Jane Eyre, French words are not only used for their aesthetic value, their exoticism and musicality, but also because they're culturally and morally loaded, often actually negative connotations are associated with the use of French in English text. So this is part of the implied reader's mental representations of their cognitive baggage, hence the potential pitfall, which Véronique Béguin calls the graying zone, risque de grisonnement, that covers up nuances and standardizes differences in the French translations. This overall tendency must yet be qualified in the 208 translation by Dominique Jean, because it results to transfer strategies taking up into account the cognitive dimension of producing and receiving translating materials. And I invite you to read the essay to find out what he does and how he does it. So in Bronte's English text, French words are not only scattered throughout, they're gradually woven into the fabric of the English text, so that the language origin is smoothed out to create a form of continuum between French and English. French gradually contaminates the text as the narrator imports French words, or even full expressions, verbatim into her sentences. So for example, I quote, "This, par parenthèse, will be thought cool language." So sometimes italics indicating foreign borrowings even progressively disappear, French words being even anglicized and spelt with a mix of English and French letters. For example, with the word naivety, which is spelled out naïveté with the accent at the end in English text. Charlotte Bronte's text relies on semantic but also grammatical continuum, since it is fraught with barbarisms, that is to say words and even phrases that are badly formed according to traditional philological rules, as they are coined with a mixture of French and English elements. This sentence, for example, "The old crone nished a laugh," unquote, points at both the gap and the proximity between languages. The French verb nicher, which means to hide in, conjugated in a preterite tense with the English ed ending, is phonetically and lexically very close to Old English snicker, meaning to laugh in a half-suppressed way. However, this overlapping of languages automatically disappears in the French translations. There is no language continuum, but rather a language continuity through the single use of French in the translations and the absence of any reference to the subtle blending of languages in the source text. The translations mostly focus on the language of mental images. So to conclude, the question of which language to favor and Charlotte Bronte's refusal to resort to translation systematically is recurrently raised throughout her work in a metafictional discourse that betrays the author's inner turmoil between a wish to keep foreign words for linguistic authenticity, to be coherent with her co-text, and the risk she runs of making her text inaccessible to those of her readers who knew only English due to an irreducible sense of unfamiliarity and even otherness. This hesitation reveals the author's deep reflection around the use of untranslated French words. She consistently reconsiders a choice of language which is never only artificial but serves a purpose. Through a superimposition of languages, a choice not to use equivalences and to keep a feeling of otherness in the text, she privileges cultural decentering and asks for the reader's cooperation, as analyzed by Umberto Eco. Bronte dreams of foreign languages, viewed as tools that must serve a subject matter an idea, or an emotion. For the latter to bloom and take on their full meanings, the author feels she cannot be constricted to one language system, but conversely wished she could dig into multiple language systems, ideally viewed as a continuum. She thus relies on her readers to produce textual meaning, and when there are no editorial signs to guide them, they must look for interpretative clues, be they etymological, phonetic, or contextual, to unlock the meaning of the passage. Bronte's pedagogical approach into textual deciphering is not translated into the French versions of her work, so that readers are not educated to reading. They are spoon-fed by the translators, who have worked around the problem and also défraîchi the text by fading out the latter's sense of otherness. They remain passive and external to the foreign character of the text before them. Meaning is not gradually allowed to emerge through the harmonious blending of the two languages, since it is already a priori given. The Franco-English linguistic union is definitely broken in the translation, which privileges one language viewed as independent from the other. As the teaching-learning process fails to be reproduced in the French translations, and despite the recent tendency to take the audience's response into account, it seems that there is an urgent need for the translators to implement a full dynamic equivalence between the source text and the target text, and acknowledge the cognitive processing in the production and the reception of translation. I hope this overview has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to explore the essay in greater depth. I encourage you to delve into the full text and also to discover the comprehensive insights offered throughout the book by my numerous colleagues. Happy reading, and please do get in touch if you wish for further discussions on this work. Thank you very much for listening.